Thanks for listening to the Free For All After Party from Fox 4. The best news, sports, and weather is available anytime at fox4news.com. Now, enjoy the show. All right, everybody, welcome to Free For All After Party, the podcast. It is March 7th. I'm sitting here with MFD. This is Sammy the G, and we're actually calling this Doocy Day. So this podcast is going to be all about Mike Doocy, and I know he loves that.
Yay!
Why is it? Why are we... Tell us why is March 7th a special one?
It is the 28th anniversary of my first day at Fox 4. I started March 7th, 1994 at Channel 4, which was then a CBS affiliate, believe it or not. Some of the old timers remember that. But my family and I moved from eastern Iowa to the big city of Dallas, Texas, back in 1994. March 7th was my first day on the air. 5 o'clock sportscast. We used to do a thing called the 5 o'clock sportscast back in the day. Hard as that is to believe.
I wonder how many times he's going to bring this up during this.
So that was my first on-air appearance, and here we are all these years later.
Well, I'm excited for this because I get to play interviewer. Oh. You get to be interviewee, my subject.
I worry because I think sometimes I bore you by talking about the old days so much in the office. You and Landry, our producer, are about the same age, right?
Yes.
Both in your early to mid-30s.
Yes.
And I tend to talk about old times a lot. But if you're going to let me do it for the next half hour, I will gladly do it.
He thinks I get tired of it, but actually I find it fascinating because I do think it's rare for people, especially in our industry, to stay in one place for such a long time. And I think that's just a testament to not only how good of a job you've done here in Dallas, but how much you love what you do. I personally, if you're not passionate, you're smirking there, but if you're not passionate about what you do, then there's no way you would have done it for this long. I know not everything is perfect, right? But viewers have heard bits and pieces of how you got your start in the industry, but we're really going to break it all down. We're going to get candid into it. And so my first question for you was, why did you want to become a sportscaster? What moment for you were you like, this is what I want to do?
I think my story's pretty typical in that as a kid, I loved sports. I grew up in a town where baseball was a big sport. So I played baseball from the time I could walk practically and through high school, and basketball too. Didn't have football at my school, it was so small. But I was not a college level athlete, not a Big Ten caliber athlete. I went to Iowa. But I was also fascinated by radio. I was, and I've told you this a million times, I'd listen to that little transistor radio in my bedroom at night. And in Bancroft, Iowa, you could get the big city stations, those clear channel stations like WBZ in the city where you grew up in Boston, or KDKA in Pittsburgh, or WLS in Chicago. I still think of all of these stations. So radio is what fascinated me first, and not just sports, because I'd listen to games, baseball, basketball, hockey, whatever at night. But music radio, too, I loved, and the DJs and all that stuff. That's what I wanted to do as well. So that's kind of how I got interested in broadcasting in more of a broad sense, if you will. But I always had a feeling sports would be a part of it because I love sports so much, and it was such a part of my life, like you, from the time we were little kids.
I don't think, though, I knew that this isn't about me, by the way, but I'm just adding.
It can be.
I don't think this, it wasn't something that I... You're
going to start twitching, I know, if you don't...
I don't get to say something about myself. I definitely didn't know this was something I wanted to do till way later on. I think for you it was a little different. But what was your first, did you do an internship first in radio, or was your first gig was in radio, right?
It was, my first several. I got a job at the student station at the University of Iowa. And that would have been... Actually, I went to a small school my first year and then transferred to Iowa my sophomore year. So I got a job at the student station at Iowa my sophomore year, and then I got a job between my sophomore and junior years at a radio station up by my hometown that had just signed on the air. And it was literally out in the middle of a cornfield, the studio was. It was like 45 minutes from my house. So on Saturdays and Sundays, how I got this job, I'll never know. I guess I had a tape to give him. I basically ran that station. I signed it on at 6 in the morning. I had to take the transmitter readings. I had like a third-degree FCC license, which you needed to have back then. And I, spun the records and read the farm markets and the obituaries and all that stuff. And then I did the same thing Sunday. So and that was actually a paying job. The summer between my sophomore and junior year. Then when I went back to Iowa, I got a job at a radio station. Or when I went back to Iowa City to college, I got a job at a radio station, and then I kept that my junior and senior year. So I've been lucky to earn a paycheck in this business of some type or another, really since I was 19, 20 years old.
I mean, I don't even, especially now, it's really hard to break into the industry, and I always find it interesting. Do you think it was harder back then to break into it than it is now? How do you... When you look back on it, were you like, wow, I was really lucky to get that opportunity because, just your particular path and where it led you, to this
That's a
point?
good question. I don't know if it's easier or harder now. I would guess it's more difficult now because I think more people want to do it. Mm-hmm. What I've always told students is, take advantage of being in a college town. If you're in a smaller market, you're more likely to get hired, whether it's an internship or an actual paying job, and maybe more so even in television. You can get a weekend behind the scenes job, in Lubbock, maybe if you go to Texas Tech at one of the real TV stations and earn some money at the same time and get great experience. So my guess is that it's a little tougher to get started now than it was back then, but radio is what I really wanted to do. And that, I tell people, I got my degree from the University of Iowa, but my education was at KRNA Radio, because this guy had started this station in Iowa City. He'd been a big-time radio DJ in Washington, D.C., but he wanted to buy a station. So he bought one randomly in Iowa City and brought some of his buddies with him. So it had kind of a big market feel and a big market sound. And I just did like the news on weekends and the sportscasts on this station, but I got to go cover the Hawkeyes and got
which was big time.
Big time, press pass. I got to cover football and basketball that way. So it was a good experience while I was in college.
So obviously you have a voice for radio, but you had a face for TV, so lucky you.
What do you mean had?
See my subtle thing there.
Nice.
It's a joke.
Nice.
So tell me about your first TV gig. How did you land your first TV gig? Where was it? And how did that all come about?
I did radio in the big burgs of Iowa City, Mason City, Webster City, Iowa. And then I got a job in Topeka, Kansas at a station, WIBW, which was AM, FM, and TV all in the same building.
That's really neat.
And so I went there to do radio, but one day I was out doing a radio remote, like at a hardware store or something, and the TV news director zoomed up in one of the station vehicles and said, hey, I still remember their names, Ron and Brad. Ron was the sports director, Brad was the weekend guy. They're both sick. We need somebody to do the sports tonight at 6 o'clock. They'd both called in like on a Wednesday. So I'd never been on television before. I had one sport coat that I drove home and got, and
so did you have any
tied
clue
my
what
little
you
tie.
were going to be doing?
Luckily there was somebody there to help me that day. I didn't have to produce my own show. Usually in Topeka you would, obviously. But I remember nervously typing up a few scripts and just being petrified, but getting through it. And then I kind of weaseled my way in because you know how it is.
Yeah,
it's kind of nice.
Once you get your foot in the door, you're like, hey, I'm here.
And if you're the weeknight guy or the weekend guy in Topeka and some schlub's willing to come in and do a Saturday once in a while and give you a day off.
Then that schlub will be available again.
Yeah,
you were the schlub.
I was, and so I got probably a dozen shows under my belt in about a year, and then out of that got a job in La Crosse, Wisconsin as a weekend guy, and then went back to Cedar Rapids, and then came here. So really, I did radio for about 7 years, and then I was 35 when I got this job. So really, I'd only done TV probably for less than 7 years before I got this job. So all things considered, even though I was a little old to be starting off in major market TV, I really hadn't been in television that long.
So this is going to sound like a dumb question, or it's going to show again our age difference. So you were in Kansas. Right. So how were jobs posted back then? Were they in the newspaper? I'm just confused as to how did that happen?
That's a fair question. I don't remember how I got the job in Kansas, but But you tended to look at like the trade magazines, broadcasting, or there was a newspaper called Radio and Records that came out every week, and they'd have want ads in the back, classifieds, and a lot of people got jobs that way. But word of mouth as well. News director here knows a program director there, and they're having a conversation, and one guy says, "Yeah, we got a guy who's pretty good here." So that happens sometimes too. But yeah, it is crazy to think, before the internet, how anybody ever got a job, right?
How the hell do you get a job in this field and then get your next one?
No, but some of it's luck, some of it's, but like everybody, I had a million rejection letters, from markets that I think they'd probably take me in now, but hey.
F them, okay?
South Bend, Indiana didn't need me, whatever.
That's really funny. I applied to a job in South Bend, Indiana while I was looking. I ended up in Oklahoma City, but I actually applied to a job there and heard one thing back, but they were going to hire someone internally. But anyways, so after Kansas, where did you go?
Kansas, went to La Crosse, Wisconsin. That was my first full-time TV job. Weekends for 2 years, weeknights for 2. And then had a chance to go back to Iowa and went back to Cedar Rapids, which was a little larger market than like La Crosse. It was like market 80. Covered the Hawkeyes. That's the market where the University of Iowa is. And so got to cover the Hawkeyes on TV, which was a lot of fun.
That must have been kind of a little full circle moment, right?
Yeah, it was. And
really neat that you were able to stay, like go start in Iowa and go back there, because that's just not, really common for people to be able to do that, even experience that for some stretch of time.
It would be like going back and kind of touching base in Boston. And it was, I don't think about it a lot, but it was really fun because it was like, there were like 10 years between me graduating from college and then going back to take that job. And I was just in a different position, professionally when I came back.
And you were with Ruth, your wife now,
we were
at
together,
that time, right?
And Christina, our older daughter, was, I guess, 2 when we moved back to Cedar Rapids. She was born in La Crosse. And we were close to family and everything, so it was a great place to be. But it didn't end up staying in Cedar Rapids very long, as it turns out.
That's what we're getting to
boy, there's a cliffhanger for you folks.
And then...
Oh, this is exhausting.
Then, I know, you hate talking about yourself, but you're just going to have to do it for another.
That is so sarcastic.
Then, somehow you ended up in Dallas, and so that's where I want to know about this process. Were you sought after? Were your brilliance on television? I mean, how did that start, the recruitment process of Mike Doocy to Dallas?
As I understand it, and I know this for a fact, in Cedar Rapids there was and is a rather well-known consulting firm called Frank Magid and Associates.
Okay.
They're based in Cedar Rapids. They used to be the place that everybody tried to get Magid to look at your tape because they would find you a job.
A job, yeah.
Our station competed against the Magid station in Cedar Rapids, okay? So Magid's like home station was our competition. So I'm told that they wanted to get me out of Cedar Rapids because I was competing against their station.
That's interesting.
So Channel 4 here at the time, before we were Fox 4, Channel 4 was consulted by this Magid and Associates. So they sent my tape to the news director here at the time, and he'd been looking for months and months and months for a new sports guy. Their guy had walked away. Craig James, the famous SMU football player, had been here just like 10 months, and then ESPN came calling, and so they needed a new sports guy. So out of the blue, one day, I got a call from Dallas, Texas, and asked if I wanted to come down. It would have been in December of '93. Come down and interview.
Were you nervous?
I was very nervous. Last place I ever thought I would interview or want to live or want to work. Frankly, I think I'd been to Texas once in my life. Went to Lubbock to cover a Kansas State football game. But I remember, and Ruth and I talk about this all the time, it was one of those just bitterly cold December days, like 20 below actual temperature, dangerously cold. And they flew me down here and put me up at the Fairmont. Those were different times.
Jeez, living the high life. Gosh.
And it was one of those 50-degree, perfect crisps, kind of like today.
Yeah.
Winter days. And I called Ruth from my suite and said, because it's 20 and they'd close the schools up there 20 below, I said, we might want to think about this if they offer it.
Right.
This doesn't seem too bad. But
And what was her reaction when you said that?
I think she was skeptical still, to be honest, because we were going to leave everything we'd ever known,
That's a
including
scary
family,
thing.
parents, cousins, good friends. And I think we had always just kind of assumed that we would raise our family up there in small town Iowa. But they interviewed me 2 or 3 times before they finally offered the job. Because
In person or just the one?
in person, they flew me down here 3 times.
3
before
times?
The third time they finally offered the job.
No one would ever do that now, by the way, just because that's not how this industry works. You would be flown out once and then
Yeah.
maybe another fall. That's incredible. How far apart were those interviews?
Well, I think I was finally offered the job in late January. And then I
Okay.
started in early March. So
Okay.
over maybe a 6-week period. I tweeted this on Monday,
Yes.
the fact that I got a warm welcome. And of course I couldn't resist tweeting the Dallas Morning News.
You love that. You
article
love that clipping.
from the sports TV writer that weekend. And the headline was Channel 4 defends the hiring of small market anchor. And the news director was quoted as saying I wasn't the first choice. Which I wasn't, but there were some big name cable sports guys at the time that they had interviewed.
Can we mention, there's a great story that you're going to tell. You have to tell it about when Barry Switzer was hired.
Well, supposedly, among the guys who interviewed here, Vanderbilt Wright was one of the guys who was kind of a big deal on CNN at the time. And Dean Blevins, who was kind of getting his start probably in Oklahoma City at the time, or maybe
Yep.
he'd already been on the air there for a while.
And he's now he's been in Oklahoma City
he's
for years.
a staple in Oklahoma City, right behind Myron Patton.
Exactly.
But I've known Dean for a long time. But Dean, of course, played quarterback for Switzer at Oklahoma back in the day. And so supposedly Dean was one of the guys who'd interviewed here. And again, I don't assume that I got the job over anybody. I think they all probably turned down the money because Channel 4 lowballed me so much. It's true at the beginning.
But you wanted to be here, though.
I did, but I didn't even accept what they offered me at first. And that's another story. I'll get to the Switzer story.
Yeah.
But they finally offered me the job, the news director did, over dinner at the Palm. And, wrote it.
What kind of interviewing process was this? The Fairmont, the Palm? I mean.
And wrote down the salary numbers on a napkin, slid it over to me. And I'd
Wait, did they really do that?
He did it. And I sort of had researched it, so I knew what the bare minimum I could accept was, what I should, expect, and it was below that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, let me go back, talk to my wife about it, and some people I trust, and I'll get back to you.
And Ruth said, hell no,
Yeah,
you're
well,
not accepting that first.
It was a lot more money than I was making in Cedar Rapids,
Yeah.
but it wasn't what I needed to come down here. So long story short, I called him back. I'll never forget, it was from an edit booth in Cedar Rapids, so I was kind of by myself, and I said, Mike Seacrest was his name. I said, Mike, I just can't accept the offer you've made. I really appreciate it. I don't want to go back and forth on this. I said, this is what I'll take, and I gave him a number.
Your number.
And I said, I really appreciate it. And he pauses. And, he was pissed. I'm going out on a limb for you here, pal. I'm going on a limb. This is market 80 to market 8. Are you kidding me? You're going to do this? I'm going to run it past the GM, but he won't like this. Click. 5 minutes later, he calls back and offers me the job. Says, we have a deal. Says, we have a deal. And I'm thinking, damn, I should have asked for more,
It worked.
Yeah, should have asked for more though. Story of my life. No, but Switzer, back to the Blevins thing.
Yeah, I like-
Switzer's news conference is happening at Valley Ranch, okay? And I'd gotten here in March of '94, obviously, thinking I was going to be hosting the Jimmy Johnson show. Jimmy and Jerry split up. Barry gets hired like in the first month here. It was just a whirlwind.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
But anyway, we're out at Valley Ranch in the press conference room waiting for Switzer to come in and be officially introduced. Blevins had played for Switzer. So we're sitting there, and I'd not met Dale Hansen before. But Dale's on the other side of the room holding court, as Dale will do, and says loudly enough so he knows I can hear it, "Bet Channel 4 wishes they'd hired Blevins now."
Were you pissed that he said that?
I was just,
I
I
would've
didn't
been
know what to
pissed.
think. I didn't know whether to shoot or go blind at that point, to be honest. I was just, it was just, Oh, that when I look back on it,
I'm going to show him.
It's a really funny story when I look back on it, and a true story. To me, I'm
That's
sure
an
they were
unbelievable
I'm sure they were
story.
kicking themselves, but I had 3 years guaranteed at that point, baby, at 37.5 a year, so I was good. No, so that was kind of how it all started here at the News Leader.
That's an incredible story, and I think most people probably don't know that. I don't think you haven't talked about that on radio or anything, have you, like that?
I don't, probably not. Yeah, now that I think about it.
That's an epic freaking story.
Now that I think about it, yeah. I doubt if Dale remembers it either.
Oh, I'm sure he does. Well, anywho, we're just getting started. We are going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into Dallas, your time here, your best moments, worst moments, regrets. No.
I've had a few.
Stay tuned. This is Free for All After Party, the podcast.
Whether you're born here or just got here, here's some news. In fact, more news than anyone in town. Always local, just like you. So welcome, locals. Your news is here. They start their morning before the sun rises and end hours after dawn. 6 straight hours of weather and traffic. Why? To make sure you have a good day. Evan and Chip, here for you. Good Day, 4 to 10 a.m. on Fox 4.
All right, welcome back, everybody. It's Doocy Day on what am I saying? It is Doocy Day on Free For All After Party podcast. I'm a little tongue-tied. I love just...
Still tired from that weekend, are you? You all right?
I spent the weekend in Fredericksburg, which I had been wanting to go to for a really long time because everyone was talking about how great it was. So if you've never been, go check it out because the wine vineyards
It's cool.
They're unbelievable. Anyway, this isn't about me. This is about Mike today.
Next week will be about you.
Sure.
You've heard that before, right?
Yeah. So I just want to get into, just your time in Dallas when you first started out, like your first year here. Was it a big transition for you? Because like you said, where you would come from in Cedar Rapids, sure, it was a decent sized market. You were able to cover some pretty big things there, but was it intimidating stepping into this market when you first came, or were you like, you know what, I'm going to show everyone that I'm meant to be here, and I'm going to show it right away?
I think it was intimidating, but the good thing about doing sports on TV, I think, especially the way we used to do it, is the fact that I think anybody can get through 2.5 or 3 minutes, and that's what we were doing. We're doing 5, 6, and 10 o'clock sportscasts like everybody did back then, and you'd have to be pretty bad to be so rattled that you couldn't make it through one of those shows. So I don't know if anybody watching at home could tell that there were times where, I felt out of place. I wondered if I'd made the right decision. Everybody was so established here. Hanson had been here forever. Scott Murray, who you just met,
he's a great
had been
guy.
here forever at Channel 5. Randy Galloway was this legendary columnist at the Dallas Morning News, later the Star-Telegram, the radio people who are still in place, Brad Sham doing the games for the Cowboys. Cooperstein was already established here.
It's crazy to think how all those guys are still here doing what they're doing, and some of their roles may have switched as to what they're doing currently, but was it cutthroat to you?
That's a good question. I felt that pressure of the Sunday night shows were a big deal back then, and I wanted to establish a long-form Sunday night show that did well, and you just live and die with those numbers every Monday when you'd get those ratings, and did a lot of dying, especially early on. But I do thank my management, my early management. The general manager who hired me had a news background and really was a big supporter of mine, as was the news director, who was quoted in the story as saying I wasn't his first choice. And then, a year and a half after I was hired here.
I wasn't the first choice either.
Well, you know how I feel about that. we switched to Fox and all that, 18 months after I started. So there were a lot of changes here. So in some ways, maybe that worked to my advantage because everything was sort of new at that point. We were almost starting over as a news department and rebranding and starting the 9 o'clock news and all that. But yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't say that I felt some pressure because we've known each other long enough now. You know that I don't exactly let things roll off my back, so I tend to internalize some things.
It's hard to do it in this business, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I think even people who don't admit that, I'm sure they feel it, but you and I are just kind of, we can sometimes let we wear our emotions on our sleeve, which isn't a bad thing all the time.
And I was lucky to meet good people early on. We were the Cowboys station, quote unquote, official station, so I got to do the preseason games on TV.
Like you got to do one with Madden and
and then I did sidelines for Fox before they had permanent sideline people.
So I do the video of that. We need to pull that up.
So I do the sidelines for some of the Madden Summerall games, and I got to know those crews, and I got to know, obviously, when he was still playing, Troy. And Michael Irvin and those great players from those Cowboys teams, guys whom have been really good to me throughout my career here. I did work with Babe Laufenberg early on.
Yeah.
Babe was our analyst here on Fox 4 for a while for our shows, and you know what a great guy Babe is, and he really sort of opened some doors for me, I think, in that Cowboys locker room, with some of those players, to get to know them in a way that I would not have been able to otherwise. So it's not always my personality to be outgoing and necessarily
which surprises me because you're very outgoing.
Get to know people. So I'm one of the things I'm proudest of, and I have a ton of regrets, a lot of things I would have done differently, but I'm proud that I sort of forced myself to get out there. We did a lot of different types of shows back at that time, and
shows with audiences too. I remember
what
was the one that you
Sports
did?
Waves,
yeah, that was really cool.
That was
to
produced
see.
out of house and up at a restaurant up Central Expressway. So yeah, I got to know a lot of good people, and it's really served me well for my entire time here.
What do you miss? I know you talk about this a lot, but what do you miss about like the glory days of TV when you compare it to now? What are some of the things that you miss most? Because as we know, like the dynamic of television has changed, immensely since you got into the business.
Probably need to be careful how I phrase this. I'm going to say it. I miss being a larger part of our newscasts, of all of our newscasts, because sports here used to be, a part of every newscast that was on the station. That's just not the case anymore. I don't know if that's good or bad. I don't know if it's smart or not smart. It's just the way it is, and I do miss it. With that said, I do enjoy the long form show that we're able to have every night, and I think that gives us an advantage that none of the other stations has. So if there has to be a trade-off, I think that's a decent trade-off. I miss, travel. The budgets were just different back then. We traveled to
crazy budgets. So some of the things you told me that you would spend money on, like
we'd go to the Super Bowl every year, whether the Cowboys were in it or not. And I only covered one Cowboys Super Bowl, so went to 9 or 10 others. Just because it was the Super Bowl, and you went and covered the Super Bowl for a week. Other than that, I think I'm not sure a ton has changed. One thing that hasn't changed is the fact that the Cowboys still rule the roost, right?
Yeah.
And they still make news year-round, whether they're in season or out of season, whether they're winning or losing. Again, they haven't been to the Super Bowl in a quarter of a century. But, there are a few things I miss. Obviously you miss some of the people you used to work with because it's such a revolving door.
But what's crazy is that so many people here are still here, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's a tribute to our management, in case they're listening, to keep the on-air team together here, I think, has made a huge difference. And the behind-the-scenes team, too. A lot of people who produce our shows and manage our content have been here for a long, long time, and I think it shows with the loyalty that our viewers have to this product.
You're very funny. I don't know if you know that. You're witty. You're good on radio. I'm not just saying all of this to blow, steam up your butt, but
whoa!
Yeah, sorry.
Hey.
But you
you're very good at what you do. And like I was saying to you before, like obviously TV has changed so much. You're very active on Twitter. I know Twitter is actually one of your favorite things.
It is, yeah.
And it's not like, my mom dabbles in Twitter. My dad doesn't, obviously, but why do you think you've been successful in just transitioning with the changing of the times? What has allowed you to do that so well?
This is the portion of the show where Sam reminds everyone that I'm as old as her parents, by the way. I am somewhat addicted to Twitter, to be honest. Yeah. And that isn't necessarily like me. I don't know. I haven't spent that much time thinking about it. I enjoy it for what it is. I follow the feeds that I enjoy or I think I can trust for information, and I try to have fun with some of the stuff that I post, or if I have some good info that I think people would enjoy, I'll put it out there. I'll admit I like some of the feedback. I'm insecure as the next guy, and sometimes
you like to go back and forth with some peeps.
But sometimes if you happen to post that it's your 28-year anniversary at a certain TV station, you get 1,000 people liking it. It makes you feel kind of good,
right?
You know? At least there's 1,000 out there that
there's
that
more
like
than
you.
that.
So I think I've done a decent job with social media. Could do a lot better, I think. And
you have to keep it all in stride.
Our show, the way we do it now, has forced me to change the way I look at the way we do TV. And again, whether that's right or wrong, I'm still not convinced. But I think the fact that we do a show every night that is more often than not kind of a talk show. I mean, we're playing the hits. We're talking about what we think people are interested in, and not just putting video up there because this is the time to put that video up there, because that's the same way you would have done it 30 years ago if you were doing a sportscast. I think it's probably good for a person like me to have to be forced into those changes. I think we've probably made those changes in the sports side of things more than maybe even news has, or I think weather is largely done the way that's always been done, but we've and well done by our Dan Henry, I might say. He's the best in the business.
Dan Henry.
But for sports, we've been challenged to try to do things a little bit differently, and I think on our good nights we do it well.
But don't you think it's amazing too? I mean, you've put out some tweets that have gotten an enormous amounts of reaction and response. I mean, is it cool to see that when you think certain topics will naturally get reaction from people, right? But are you ever amazed to think back, like, wow, I didn't think this, my opinion here, this was going to, like, for instance, with the whole national anthem with Jerry Jones, when that whole thing happened, that was a big moment in your career, right? And just in terms of kind of standing your ground and deciding not to interview him at training camp because he wasn't going to talk about it.
Yeah, that was a weird night because we all do the interviews on a Sunday night, and we were going to record ours at 9:30, a half an hour ahead of our show. The Kaepernick thing was kind of coming to a head, and Rich Dalrymple brought Jerry over to do the interview and said, "Oh, by the way, the Kaepernick stuff's off limits." And I mean this. It wasn't because it was Kaepernick. It was just because I was told 30 seconds before an interview that there was something I couldn't talk about, that I just didn't feel like I could go through with it. And I said this on the air that night. It went against my own philosophy in some ways, because my thing has always been, even if there are rules ahead of time, guidelines, restrictions, if it's a big-time newsmaker, get him anyway, get her anyway, because it's still important to your audience to hear that person. It hit me the wrong way that night, and it just didn't feel like I could go ahead and go through with it. So that was kind of the first, probably
do you stand by that?
One of the first. Yeah, I do. I think the circumstances were such where that was the right decision to make that night, and that was maybe the first time on social media that I'd faced that kind of storm. It's funny because I got a text from my cousin Steve, the noted host of Fox and Friends on Fox News Channel, and obviously a lot of controversy there. Just that's what they do. They take one side of the political spectrum and run with that ball, and it's been very successful for them. But he texted me, and basically said, patted me on the back, which meant a lot to me, but said, do yourself a favor, just don't look at your Twitter responses for a while. Take my word for it.
So you
That's how he
did,
put it. Yeah,
naturally.
naturally. Not all of them, but some. That stuff doesn't bother me as much as and I'll bet you're the same way. That stuff doesn't get to you as much as it used to. If it's personal, we've talked about this before, if it's a weird little shot at something that's really unfair, maybe it will, but just in general, if it's just some idiot who you can tell doesn't know what they're talking about, I try not to let it bother me.
I've gotten stronger since I've gotten in this business with it, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have too.
I've got enough idiots that I know that I don't have to worry about the idiots I don't know, right?
So, out of all the athletes, you've covered some big-time athletes. You've covered a lot of Hall of Famers. Who's been your favorite athlete to cover over all these? And you're still going, but I'm talking about, who's been your favorite?
You know, it's funny. I heard Dirk on the ticket this morning. He's got a new book out, or there's a book out about him. And it reminded me how much fun it was to follow him and cover him. And I mean, you were with me
Tell that story.
in the hallway there at American Airlines Center when I had hit 25 years, I think it was. And he was walking by, and he looks over and goes, "Dude, 25 years, congratulations!" And I'm like, who else would do that?
I mean, how cool was that?
Who else would do that?
I saw that. I was there for that.
So he'd be up there on the list. Certainly Aikman, who's really been so good to me throughout the years. Those Cowboys teams were amazing to cover. I think the Stars championship run was maybe the most fun event or series of events I've gotten to cover. And Madonna and some of those guys were great. But I think the most colorful, interesting, provocative interview consistently has always been Michael Irvin. I think as a player and after his playing days, and sometimes for all the wrong reasons, and he'd be the first to admit it. But
and I'm not asking you to get into this, but you told me some stories, and we don't have to get into those, but I'm sure you can appreciate how candid he was with you about some things, even during his playing days. Am I right?
Yeah, he would pull me aside sometimes and just want to talk a little bit about what was going on in his life and how it was being interpreted and how it was being perceived and how the media was covering it and on, and a lot of it was off the record. But I don't know if I've ever told you this story. He was suspended. One of the times he was suspended, I was driving through Carrollton where I live, and he lived in Carrollton at the time.
Wow.
And I was driving past a middle school, and Irvin was suspended at the time, and I glance over, and there's Michael Irvin running pass routes on this middle school football field.
Stop.
Somebody's throwing him passes.
No way.
Yeah. So this was before cell phones, cameras, and everything. So I pulled over and just sat there and watched for a while, and he came over and we just chatted for a minute. And what I wouldn't have given to have had a camera there, I didn't. But
what was he suspended for at that time? Do you remember?
I can't remember what the offense was. I honestly can't. What it was.
So you went over, sat and watched him.
Yeah, and had a nice little chat. But I'm really happy for him that he is having the success he is in TV. It's like some guys, you look at Troy and how great he is on TV. I wouldn't have necessarily predicted that because he was so reserved as an interview when he was playing. But again, if you got him off to the side, you knew how smart and how opinionated he could be and how candid. But Irvin, I think everybody saw it when he was playing, that personality just larger than life. So he's done really well. So those are just some of the people, I think, some of the characters that I've been able to cover. And it's, I think, one of the things I probably miss, you ask what I miss.
Yeah.
This is partly my own fault about just having to do with the way I cover things now as opposed to the way I used to. I think we used to be closer to active athletes, active players. I think they were more likely to watch local news so they would know who you are.
Right.
And now they are either maybe watching ESPN or they're just, doing everything through social media and kind of bypassing us altogether. So I think it's a little more difficult to get to know guys. Plus, I was closer in age to them back then too than I am now.
And that's an interesting point too, because I think too, that maybe athletes just seem a little bit more guarded now because of social media in a way? Because anyone can say anything about them at any given time, and they can see it at any given time too. So do you think that plays into it too? Because when you look at some of the relationships that you formed with these guys over the years that you've sustained for 25 plus years, I mean, I don't think you see that now in general because of some of these things, just because everyone can be in your business, so to speak.
You know, I think of somebody like Tony Casillas, who's done our show a million times since you've been here, and did it long before that. And I got to know Tony when he was a player, obviously to a certain extent, but even more so after that. And just to be able to form that kind of friendship means so much to me. Chad Hennings was another guy who played for the Cowboys. We had an Iowa connection that kind of automatically opened some doors. But yeah, I do think it's just a different dynamic now. And I feel for the beat writers and the reporters who have to be, out there every
all
day
the time,
and wonder how it's changed their job. Because I think, especially now post-COVID, I don't know that open locker rooms are ever going to be quite the same again. I think there's going to be permanent restrictions put on access now.
Most frustrating athlete you've had to cover, or most difficult, or was there just one guy that always gave everyone a hard time?
John Wetland, the Rangers pitcher, was notoriously difficult.
Really?
Notoriously difficult, yeah. And I remember him showing me up at spring training one time and just giving me a hell of a time, trying to kind of mock me during an interview, and I'm like, okay, what do you want to do? If you don't want to do it, don't do it. And you glance around, and I could tell even his teammates were uncomfortable. But then you find later that he is probably, of the DFW anchors and reporters of my era, the guy that gave them the most difficult time. Relatively few, though, have been that way. And some. Charles Haley used to be kind of scary when he played, to be honest.
I could see that.
If you caught him on a bad day. But Charles is a big teddy bear now, and just a great guy. And there, certain people, obviously, you needed to pick your spots and kind of read the room before you went after them. But for the most part, the relationships have been pretty good.
Well, I have to say, when I came here, when I got this job, I never thought I was going to get this job. I've mentioned this before, but I really didn't. I was told by the agent that I have now, you should apply, blah, blah, blah. So I was like, okay, fine. I was petrified when I came in to interview with you here, because once I had seen, now I didn't know who you were at the time, but that's only because, I was in Oklahoma City in my own little bubble. So it wasn't like I knew who all the sports anchors were. But once I saw how long you had been here for and how established you were, I go, oh crap, like I'm gonna have to go in here. Didn't sleep the night before. I was flown in for a day of interviews, spent the whole day there. But, and then when I got the job, I was like, okay, like this is going to be an interesting dynamic, because in my mind I'm like, what if he's an asshole? Like legitimately, because here's the thing, you could be an ass if you wanted to be, and I'm saying this in the nicest possible way, just because of the reputation that you've built here and the things that you've covered. But you're not that way at all. You're the furthest thing from it, which is why I think so many people gravitate towards you, and why so many people, including myself, admire and look up to you. Where does that come from? Where does your humbleness come from?
Well, that's a really nice thing to say, Sam. I do appreciate it, and I do think I'm one of the most humble people that you'll ever meet. And for the record, the joke I always tell, the line I always use, and I use it on social media today in a response to something you said, is I didn't want to have a co-host, but if I have to have one, I'm glad it's you.
Yay.
There's a kernel of truth to that, but it's more than that now. I think you know how much I appreciate working with you.
Of course.
I think you do know that. And I could say the same thing about you, in that it would be so much less fun if you were difficult to work with. For all the things that have changed through the years in that office, I don't think I've ever looked forward to coming into the office more than I do now.
That's so nice.
And in spite of the fact that I come in really late sometimes and act like I don't want to be there.
You've earned that right. You've earned that right to do that.
I really enjoy it. I don't know. I think
your dad?
My dad, worked the same job for a long, long time, had a clothing store, on Main Street in our little town for 30, 40 years, and was kind of like me in a way, sort of a humble guy, but sort of a ham too. You know what I mean? And my mom was a very, very humble person, just a very considerate person. So hopefully I got a little bit of their best qualities on both sides. But I've always, I enjoy a lot of the trappings of the business. It's fun to be able to do what we do. It's funny to get paid what we get paid and get some of the perks. But I've always enjoyed the work fundamentally.
Yeah, you're a worker.
When I get pissed off is when I'm not allowed to do the work. When I'm not allowed to
be in front of that camera.
Yeah.
I get it.
Or to cover things, whatever. So hopefully, just the fact that I just like what I'm doing comes through from time to time, because I complain too much. That's one of the things I like least about myself, is the lack of gratitude that I show all too often.
You're human. I think you're too hard on yourself in that regard.
Yeah, it's been a nice ride. 28 years and still going.
I've always said, you're very confident. We were just talking about this in the office earlier, that you're very confident, but you're not cocky. I think that there's a big difference between someone who is cocky and someone who is confident. I think that it's a very fine line, of course, but I definitely think you're confident, you're engaging, you're genuinely interested in other people, which shines through. Whenever we go anywhere, everyone always wants to talk to you, and they want to talk to you like you're their friend. So I guess one of my final questions for you is, when all is said and done, whenever that's going to be, which isn't going to be for another 10 years, what do you want your legacy to be? I know people don't talk about legacy, and maybe you won't even think about it, but for yourself, what do you see as your legacy? That I taught, Sam Gannon well, so she can pick up the mantle after she forces me out, and shine that bright light right into your eyes.
Go to the light, old man. Go to the light, so she can take the department in a new, brave direction. No, I don't know. I don't know about legacy.
Okay, we don't have to talk about it now.
I just.
Well, I know what part of it is. For a huge part is that, you lead by kindness and example and integrity. That's how I see you. I think the way you report on the serious things is very old school in a good way, which a lot of people don't do anymore. I think you're very, you just don't put stuff out there to put it out there. And you could if you wanted to. I don't think people realize, Mike has a lot of connections, he just doesn't feel the need to always be the one to put something out there. And he could put it out there if he wanted to. So I'm just putting that on the table. But you could, and I admire just the way you handle your job day to day. I think it's something that everyone should aspire to be like.
Well, clearly I've fooled you, Sam, and you're 3 years plus here now.
Not even 3.
Not quite 3?
3 is coming up next week.
All right. What's your date?
I think it's March 11th or March 12th. I always get it confused.
All right. Well, next week we'll do this show about you then,
maybe.
on your anniversary day.
Anything else you would like to add? Anything else you would like to say?
Seriously, I'm sarcastic about this stuff, but I do appreciate everybody watching, and it is cool to know that people have stuck with us all these years. It's the last place that I ever thought I would end up for nearly 30
Isn't that
years,
funny how
but
that
I
works out?
really feel fortunate. Texans are the friendliest people I've ever been around. I can honestly say that. And in spite of that newspaper headline, the welcome was very warm, and it continues to be after all these years. So I do appreciate it.
Well, Mike, happy 28th anniversary at
Thanks,
Fox
Sammy.
4. I'm going to let you sign us out.
Oh, my. Man, I'm exhausted from that. Sammy the G, you're too kind to me. This is MFD. Have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.